Greetings, everybody. Welcome to session number 9 of FileMaker Group Therapy for Citizen Developers. My name is Tim Jones, and our topic for this session is script triggers. On today's agenda, I'd like to introduce you to script triggers. I'd like to help you to learn the order in which they fire. We're going to do some comparing of pre-event and post-event triggers. We'll also learn how to cancel a trigger event. And then lastly, learn the exceptions to the rules. That is, when events do not trigger scripts. So let's dive right in. Introducing script triggers. Script triggers, to sum it up, run your scripts in response to events. Events like a user opens or closes a window, or a user navigates to a different layout. A script takes the user from browse mode to find mode. A script enters or exits a field or a tab panel, or a user edits the value in a field. Each of these is an event that's capable of triggering scripts we've written, which gives us the chance to transparently interrupt the user experience to automate, validate, educate. In short, script triggers can make your FileMaker apps event-driven. There are 4 types of script triggers and 25 of them in all. 5 of them are what we call the file level script triggers. They're found in the file options dialog box pictured here. Things like on first window open or on last window close. Another 12 of them are the layout level script triggers. Now, these are found in the layout setup dialog box and obviously are particular to the specific layout in which you activate them. The other 8 are what we call object level script triggers. And these can be assigned to individual objects on a layout. We'll talk later on about what qualifies as an object, but these include trigger events like on object enter or on object modify. Lastly, there's kind of this odd bird called install on timer script step. It's one of the steps in the scripting language that allows you to have one script call another script repeatedly every X number of seconds, on a loop, if you will. Now, your script triggers are tied to a specific layout or layout object, never to the underlying field or table. In other words, script triggers belong to the user interface of your solution, not to the schema. So if you want a field to always run a certain script when its contents are modified, you have to apply that to the field on every layout where it appears. You cannot apply it to the field definition itself. About half the script triggers are what we call pre-event script triggers, okay? Which means that they run the script before the event is performed. Now, that might make your head spin a bit because on a real timeline, an event that triggers something always happens before the thing that's triggered. However, with these pre-event script triggers, the triggered script can actually cancel or prevent from happening the event that triggered it. Let's walk through the sequence. An event takes place. Let's say the user closes a database window. Now, if we've activated the appropriate script trigger, then it runs some script that we've written. Perhaps that script compares the data the user has entered with data in another record or table. And maybe it contains some if statements that say, if such and such is true, then exit this script, passing a script result of true back to the script trigger that called it, in which case the event performs normally. On the other hand, if such and such is not true, then exit this script, passing a script result of false back to the script trigger, which then prevents the original event from happening. It's remarkable, really. Now, the other script triggers are all post-event, which simply means that the event is performed and then the script runs. And obviously, the script in these cases cannot cancel the event. Now let's look at the timeline, the order in which script triggers activate. Notice the line that I've drawn here. I've designated Pre-event script triggers are going to appear above the line, and post-event script triggers are going to appear below it. So you can start to get a sense of which ones can be prohibited or prevented, which ones can prevent the event from taking place and which ones cannot. The first thing that happens when a user opens a database in FileMaker Pro or Go or WebDirect is the on first window open script trigger is encountered. And if we've activated it, then a script would run. Many of us use that trigger event. In fact, in our animal care database that we'll look at later in this session, we've used that trigger event to do some things like determine what kind of device the user is connecting from, and to set some values of global fields, and to take them to a particular layout that's appropriate for their device. The second script trigger that would activate or that would be encountered is on window open. Not the first window of the database, but on any window of a database being opened. Then on layout enter, because you have to be on a layout to work in a FileMaker database. And then on mode enter, because you have to be in a mode like browse mode, which is the default mode to work in a FileMaker database. Then on record load, there's probably a record in the table of the layout that that you've been taken to, unless there are 0 records in that table. So in that case, in which case a record wouldn't load, but normally a record would load. And then lastly, on layout size change, where the size of the layout, the physical pixel dimensions on screen, would be set or determined. These 6 script triggers are going to fire within rapid succession whenever a user first opens up a database. The next batch of script triggers can happen kind of in various order based on user activity and on context where they are. For example, they might change from form view to list view, in which case the on view change script trigger would activate. On gesture tap, if they're using an iOS device, they might perform a gesture like a pinch out or pinch in, a 2-finger tap, or so forth. On object enter, they might go into an object. Again, we'll talk later about what objects are, but generally speaking, some examples, fields or portals are considered objects. On object keystroke, they might strike a key when they're in an object. On layout keystroke, they might strike a key when they're on a layout. The next batch, on panel switch, they might switch to a different panel of a tab control. On object modify, they could change the value of data. On object validate, save, and exit, and I've colored these specially because they form kind of a triumvirate of special script triggers. Those of you who might be interested in a certain developer certification exam would do well to remember these 3 and the order in which they occur. First, data is validated, then saved, then the object is exited. Again, we'll talk a little bit more in more detail about these later on, but do memorize the order of those. VSE, validate, save, exit. Make up some memory trick like, Virgil studied Euclid, something that will help you remember VSE, validate, save, exit. And then on record commit or on record revert would happen next in the normal flow of actions, of events. And our last batch of the timeline, this is the things that happen generally on your way out of the database or out of a window of the database. You would exit out of the mode you're in, whether it's browse mode, find mode, or preview mode. You would exit out of the layout you're on. You would close a window, and then eventually you would close the last window. So those are the script triggers in the order in which they activate. Now, in 2010, I had the privilege of speaking on this topic of script triggers at the annual FileMaker Developer Conference. In preparing for that session, I built a small database wherein I activated every available script trigger on every object on every layout. Now, I don't recommend that any sane person do this, but I did as a way to learn and to teach script triggers and when they fire and when they don't. The scripts that these triggers call merely show a dialog box with a comment of which event triggered it. I'll put a link to the demo file that I'm going to be showing here in the description of the video on YouTube, so you can download and play with it. But use it in small doses. It gets annoying very quickly. I'll open it up, and we'll see that 6 events occur merely by opening up the file. Here we go. Switch into FileMaker. And see if I can find my mouse. There it is. There. And there. I didn't have it open in advance because I wanted you to see what happens when we open up a database to start with. All right, so again, I activated every single script trigger, and I told them each to call a script, and that script essentially does this. It just shows a dialog box, like this dialog box here, that has as its comment, as its the body of its message, the nature of the event that triggered it. Okay, so we see the on first window open event was encountered and fired off this script that I assigned to it. I'll say okay. Next, on window open. Okay, so on first window open happened first, and then on a regular window opening happens next. Yes, it seems redundant, but that's the way the script triggers work. Then on layout enter, we're taken into this form view layout. We can see that here. Next, on mode enter, we were taken into browse mode. On record load, this Fred and Wilma Flintstone record has loaded. And lastly, on layout size change, the size of the layout has, well, I wouldn't say so much say as it's changed, but it has been set from not being existent at all. So technically that's a change. We'll say okay. All right, on this demo file, I put a master switch right up here, this checkbox that allows us to turn it off and make it so that none of the script triggers will be activated. I just put a little statement in each script that said, if that's not checked, then don't do the rest of the script, just skip. Okay, so let me quickly show you around. I've got this tab control with 4 tabs, parent, child, web viewer, and chart. And on the parent tab, we've got some some fields that are in this parent table, this table. On the child tab, we've got a portal with that shows records in a child table, and I literally called the tables parent and child, as well as the tab controls themselves. And we've got this list view over here that shows the same 2 records in a list view. And there are a text field, a number field, a calculation field, a date field, a container field, and a button or 2 scattered here and there. All right, so that's just the simple architecture of the database. And I'll take you into script workspace as well, so you can see some of these scripts. For example, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to strike a key on the keyboard, and so it's going to trigger the on layout keystroke, which I've got assigned to run this script. The on layout keystroke event is assigned to trigger this script that I called intentionally on layout keystroke. First, it checks to see if the test mode button is checked. That's this test mode button right here. And I will check it before we proceed. If that's checked, then show a custom dialog box. And then if the user responds by clicking button number 2, and I'll explain that in a second, button number 2, then exit the script and pass back a result of false. Okay, so it's just really showing a dialog box and then giving the user a way to dismiss that dialog box. All right, let's re-enable the script triggers. And I'll press the tab key on the keyboard. Oh, I also wanted to show you, sorry, before we get into that madness, I also wanted to show you where to find all of the script triggers. Let me jump into layout mode here. Okay, and in layout mode, I'll select a field. And the first set of script triggers I want to show you are the object level script triggers. We can get to the object level script triggers when we select an object, like a field or a button or a portal or a chart or a web viewer or a tab control or a popover, and then go to the format menu and choose set script triggers. Set script triggers will let us go in and set the script triggers for that object. And notice, like I said, I've turned on just about all of them. I did not bother dealing with any of the script triggers that deal with audio video. Okay, so those are kind of out of the discussion for today, but all the rest, on object enter, on object keystroke, and so on, are activated for this field, for this object. Another way, by the way, just so you know your options, to get into the set script triggers command is to do a right click on the object and choose set script triggers. Or as a shortcut, if you're on a Mac, hold down the command key. If you're on a PC, hold down the control key, and just with that key held down, command or control respectively, double click on the object. And that's a great little shortcut to opening up the set script triggers dialog box as well. Again, command double click on an object in layout mode on a Mac, control double click on a PC to get into the set script triggers dialog box for the object on which you double click. The next set of script triggers are the layout level script triggers, and we find them in the layout setup dialog box. Here in the script triggers tab, we have those layout level script triggers, things like on layout enter, on layout exit, on mode enter, on mode exit, and so on. And again, you can see that I've activated them all except for the AV ones. The third and final group of script triggers are found in the File Options command under the File menu here in their own tab. And that's where we get on first window open, on last window close, on window open, on window close, and there's another AV player one there as well. All right, so there's where you get access to all of the script triggers. I'll exit out of layout mode. And it tells me that I just entered browse mode, right? An event just took place. And that I just loaded a record, or that a record was just loaded. Starting to get annoyed yet at my my script triggers? Yeah, it gets a little madding. But here we go. I'm going to hit the tab key. And as I hit the tab key, the on layout keystroke event picks up on the fact that I pressed a key. And I even made it so that it would tell me which layout I'm on and which layout sends to the keystroke and which key I pressed. Now, there are Unicode point values assigned to every key in every written human language. You can learn more about that at unicode.org. I'll give you some common examples later, but I know that Unicode point value number 9 is assigned to the tab key. Also, I mentioned earlier, as I was showing you the anatomy of that script, that some of the script triggers are pre-event. And so I put two buttons in their dialog boxes, one that would pass back a true response to the trigger event that called this script, and one that would pass back a false event to the trigger event that called this script. And if I pass back a false, just like we saw in that illustrated diagram earlier, it will actually prevent the trigger event from happening. I'll go ahead and pass back a false by clicking this button number 2 here, and it'll be as though I never pressed the tab key. Look at that, I didn't go into anything. I'll do it again, press the tab key, get the same on layout keystroke. This time I'll pass back a true, and it's taken me into the tab control. And that tab control then said, oh, hey, you just entered into me. So the on object enter script trigger has fired. I'll say okay there, and we're into that tab control. I'm going to keep hitting the tab key. This time, the tab control's on object keystroke trigger event saw that I had pressed a key while I was in that object. Again, key number 9, the tab key. I'll go ahead and let that happen. Then the layout sensed that I struck a key, and same thing. I'll go ahead and let that happen. And now I'm exiting out of the tab control. Go ahead, and entering into the next object in the tab order, which is this text field here that I called text field. And now I'm in the text field. Getting bored? I'll hit the tab key again. This time I'm going to go more quickly through the keystrokes. There was object keystroke, layout keystroke, exit the text field, enter the number field. All right, and now we're in this number field. Now let's say that I make a change to the value in that field. I'm going to hit the delete key on the keyboard, or backspace key right now. Boom. On-object keystroke says, oh, you struck a key number 8 this time, the backspace key. Yeah, go ahead with that. Layout keystroke, yeah, go ahead with that. On-object modify, it sensed that I made a change to the value in this object. So the on-object modify script trigger fired off. I'll say okay to that. And now I've got an empty field. I'll type a 7 in there instead. Again, on-object keystroke fires. On layout keystroke fires. On object modify fires, because again, I just changed the value in that field. I modified the value in that field. We'll say okay again. And now something interesting happens as I hit the tab key to move out of this field. Several things are going to happen. I hit tab, again, on object keystroke, right? On layout keystroke, right? The tab key. Now we get that triumvirate that I introduced to you earlier, so special. Validate, save, exit, VSE. It has to, the on-object validate script trigger gives you a chance to kind of jump in before even field level validation happens, before the validation rules that you've applied when you defined this number field, before they get a chance to verify whether the entry was appropriate or not, you can run a script right at this point. You can intercept right in there before that happens and run a script that performs any kind of validation you can dream up, whatever it might be. Anything you can script, you can have that script trigger fire off. Amazing. And you can have the script that script trigger on object validate fires return either true or false. And if it returned false, then the event wouldn't happen. In other words, you would not be allowed to leave that field until the user corrected the entry, till the user made it a satisfactory entry according to the logic you build into your script. This is just really, really powerful magic stuff. I'll go ahead and say true to that. Then on object save. And then finally, now that it's been validated and saved, now we're going to be allowed to exit out of that number field. And in exiting the number field, we'll be entering the next object in the tab order, which is this plus sign button right here. So on object enter of the plus sign button. Whew. Okay, there was a lot there. Any questions or thoughts? I'm watching the chat to see. All right, fantastic. Now with that plus sign button, also I should note to you that this calculation field here is a calculation field, obviously, that has the formula written in it of number field plus 1. Okay? Number field plus 1. So whatever the number field has in it, this field is going to perform a calculation that adds 1 to it. That's why we've got an 8 here. All right. Notice though that nothing triggered in response to that calculation field changing its value. When a user modifies the value, like I just did before your eyes, we get all sorts of bells and whistles firing off, all sorts of script triggers on object modify, validate, save, exit, but a calc field triggers no such things, okay? Because it just changes its value as it's programmed to do in the calculation. Here's another situation where script triggers will not fire off. If you use a script to modify the value in a field, and you use one of the script steps that are not dependent upon the field that you're modifying being on the layout. And there are a few of those. Set field is the most common one. The set field script step does not require that the field that you're trying to set the value of be present on the current layout. Obviously, it has to be either in the current table or in a related table. You have to have valid relational access to the field, but unless it's a global field, but it doesn't have to be present on the layout. Unlike commands like the paste command or the insert text command or the insert calculated result command, those require that the field that you are trying to set the value of be present on the layout. Most of us never use those script steps because if we forget and decide, I'm going to take that field off of this layout, if we forget that there was a script that required that it be there, now all of a sudden the script is broken and we have to figure out why. So the set field script step is what this button is going to trigger. It's just going to trigger a script that runs the set field script step command that increments this value, whatever it is, by 1. Okay. Now, when you're in a button, I've just tabbed into this button, you can use the space bar or the return key. It's called the enter key on a PC keyboard, but it's the one in the main body of the keyboard, to trigger that button. And that's for the purpose of people with physical challenges who maybe can't work a mouse or a trackpad and need to manipulate, need to navigate your FileMaker solutions extensively or exclusively from the keyboard. So I'm going to press the space bar right now while I'm in that plus sign button. There it goes. And of course, that object sensed that I struck key number 32, which is the space bar key. And I'll go ahead and let that go through. Then, of course, the layout sensed that I struck a key while I was on the form view layout. Again, the space bar, Unicode point value number 32. I'll say true to that. And the number changed from 7 to 8. So that script ran, the set field command didn't trigger any on object modify, on object validate, save, exit, none of that. Okay, so be careful. Be aware of those things about script triggers. There are a number of these kind of, I won't call them inconsistencies, but just subtle nuances that you have to remember about script triggers if you really want to master them. I'll go ahead and tab on into this next field. As I hit the tab key now, of course, the plus sign button tells me, oh, you struck a key while you were in me. Which key? Key number 9, the tab key. Yep, go ahead. Layout keystroke, good. Then I'm exiting the plus button and I'm entering the date field. Okay, fantastic. Now I'm going to use the mouse and click the drop-down calendar here. And notice that I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard and there are no keystrokes, no keystroke script triggers being fired. So when you're in an interface element like a drop-down menu or a drop-down date picker, you can use the keys without unwanted firing off the script triggers. I'll go ahead and hit the enter key or return key right now to specify this new date of July 29. Boom. And several things happen. First of all, the date field reports, hey, you've just modified the value in me. Okay, good. Then we get that triumvirate again, that trio of validate, save, exit, because hitting the return key on a date field when you're picking from the date picker says, oh, he wants to move along to the next field. So let's go ahead and commit this entry. On object validate, boom, save, boom, exit, boom. And we're on, oh, and now we're entered into, not the calc field because calc fields are skipped over in the tab order, but into this popover button. And popover buttons behave just like regular buttons do in that you can press the spacebar or return key to trigger them. Yeah, I'll hit the spacebar now. On object keystroke, the popover button reports that, hey, you struck a key while you were in me. Key number 32, the spacebar. Okay, good. Go ahead with that. Layout keystroke. Good. Go ahead with that. And now I'm exiting the popover button and entering, what do you think? The popover panel. On object enter, popover panel. Nice. There's a container field sitting right here inside that popover panel. It's the only thing in there. And if I hit the tab key right now, it'll take me, well, the popover panel says you struck a key. The layout says you struck a key. And it'll take me into that container field. And I'll say, okay. Notice that I did not exit the popover panel before entering the container field. Interesting. So technically, I guess I'm in both of those things right now at the same time. What happens if I just stay right there, leave it like that without clicking in any blank space, and I just click a button that's going to run a script that will take us to a different layout? Well, let's find out. Do scripts trigger script triggers? Do the steps in scripts fire script triggers? Many of them do. Absolutely. Many of them do. Most of them. So I'll go ahead and click the list view button, and it's going to start walking me toward that list view layout. But first it has to leave or exit the container field that I'm in. Then it has to exit the popover panel that I was in. Then it has to commit the changes that I made to this record. All this time I've been talking, goodness, about a half an hour, this record has not yet been committed. So finally it gets to be committed. And then we're going to leave the form view layout. I want to point out that clicking on a button like I did to trigger this script that's going to take us to the other layout, clicking on a button does not enter you into the button. Like we saw, the tab key will enter you into a button. Remember, we got on object enter of the plus sign button, likewise on object enter of the popover button, because I tabbed into those buttons. but clicking does not take you technically into the button. So you don't get in, you don't trigger the on object enter event in a click on a button or on a tab control for that matter. One of those subtle nuances. All right, so we'll exit out of form view. We'll enter into the list view layout and it will load a record. Nice. Whew, okay. Now, list view and table view can be a little bit funky because there are multiple records visible as opposed to form view where you can only see one record at a time. Notice how on this second record, which is not the active record, I'm on record number 1, Fred and Wilma Flintstone. You can tell also by this black record indicator here. But if I were to use drag and drop to drop an image into this container field for record number 2, would that work? And what would happen? What script triggers would fire? Well, let me go and grab an image off my desktop. This animal care logo. I'll drag and drop that PNG image into the container field. And it triggers the onObjectModify trigger event because in the container field, because it saw that I just modified the value of that container field. But you know what? That's it. That's all that got triggered in response to a drag and drop in a non-active record, a record that was not the active record. If I had had that record be active, it would have had to do a number of other things. The whole validate, save, exit routine would have fired when and on record commit would have fired when I committed the change to that field by either clicking away from that record or just clicking in an empty space. But none of that happened because I modified the value of an inactive record. Okay, so be aware of that. If you're trapping for on object modify and you're in a list view layout or a table view layout, be aware that the record that was modified may not be the record you're on. Yikes, and that could be devastating. All right. Next, I'll go ahead and jump back into the form view layout and race quickly through the triggers, right? We're exiting list view, we're entering form view, and it's going to load a record there. Now here's an interesting one. I've written a script that will take us into that portal on this child tab so that I can start to work with the related child records there. I'll go ahead and run that script. It's called go to child field. And watch what happens. That field is in this child tab in a portal. And the first thing that it does is it actually takes us into the portal, on object enter portal, which is counter to my intuition. I would have thought it would have jumped tabs first and then gone into the portal, but it didn't. It goes to the portal first, then it switches tabs from the parent tab to the child tab, right? From parent here to child here, if I give it the go ahead, and I will. There, now it's jumped tabs. Then it saw that the tab control got modified. Whoa, the on object modify script trigger when applied to a tab control will actually trigger simply because a different tab was made active, okay? We'll say okay. And now we're entering into that portal field. Remember, we already went into the portal. Now we're entering into the portal field there. And I want to create a new child record here. So I'm going to click in the next row, which is waiting there, ready to make a new record. And this is kind of curious as well. When you click into a different row of a portal, you have to exit out of the portal field that you were in. You technically have to exit out of the whole portal, and then you re-enter the portal immediately, and then finally enter the field that you wanted to get to. Okay, which is strange. So you kind of have to go all the way up and out of the portal and back in, like you just did a dive up and back in. And now I'm going to start typing Fred and Wilma Flintstone's next child name. That was their son, Bam Bam, if you recall. So I'll type the letter B, yeah, keystroke, keystroke, on object modify. Type the letter A, keystroke, keystroke, on object modify. Type the letter M, keystroke, keystroke, on object modify. Whew. Okay, so you're thinking, boy, those keystrokes are going to make us nuts. Yes, be very judicious about using your on object keystroke or on layout keystroke script triggers because they fire every time a key is struck wherever you are. The one exception to that is in WebDirect. Those on object keystroke and on layout keystroke script triggers do not work in WebDirect at present. Now watch this. I've typed BAM and I want to copy and paste that, okay? We all know copy and paste. In fact, we know them so well we can use the keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command-C right now to copy BAM. Interesting. No trigger fired. I hit a key, yes, but when the application sees that that keystroke belonged to it, it intercepts it and processes it before the object and layout get a chance, and then they don't get a swing at it. The same is true if you pressed a key that the operating system knew what to do with. Like if I pressed the brightness key on my keyboard, my Mac operating system would know I'm just trying to change the brightness on my screen, okay? And it would intercept that keystroke. And it goes in that order: operating system, then the FileMaker application, and then finally the object and the layout that you're in. Okay, I'll click over here to the right of BAM and I'll do the paste command, Command-V, right? And because I changed the value in that field, I get the on-object modify script trigger, but not any keystroke script triggers. So the Command-V, the paste command, was handled by the FileMaker application, and the object and layout don't get a shot at it. Say okay there. All right, fantastic. So I've got this new BAM record created, okay? Now I haven't clicked away or anything, so that record's not committed. Nothing, I'm still in that field. What happens if I make a new window? Well, let's go to the window menu and pop open a new window. A whole bunch of things are gonna fire in response to this. First, an on window open, right? We just opened a new window called script triggers-2, okay? Then on layout, enter form view, okay? We went into a layout. Then on mode, enter browse mode, yep. And then it had to load a record, okay? And it had to set the layout size change. Good. What about switching layouts the old-fashioned way without using buttons, but using the layout pop-up menu? Does that fire off our script triggers? It sure does. Watch, as I choose list view, we have to exit out of this form view layout and enter into the list view layout, and of course, load a record once we get there. There's one script trigger, so to speak, that I haven't introduced yet, or haven't shown you yet. We talked briefly about it. It was the install on timer script step. And I'll show you a little script that I've written here called install timer script that has just one command in it, the install on timer script step. This is one of the script steps in the language. It's over here in the control group. If you're curious, it's right there, okay? And it allows you to say, I'd like you to perform this other script every X number of seconds, okay? Timer script to perform, whatever script you want this one to call, it'll call it, and it'll call it every X number of seconds. Let's do that. I've got that set to show here on the menu. Install timer script. 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1000, 4, 1005, 1000, boom, and a dialog box appears, right? So it ran that script. Oh, another 5 seconds later, it ran the script again. 3, 1000, 4, 1000, 5, 1000. Okay, so you wonder, wow, how do I stop that from happening? Well, two ways. You can either run a script that has the install on timer script step in it that doesn't have a script to perform. It just says install on timer script, but don't perform any script. Or since the install on timer script step is tied to the window in which it was triggered, you can simply close that window to stop the repetition. Closing the window, of course, will cause some other things to happen, like, oh, you've got to exit out of browse mode, you've got to exit out of that layout, and you've got to close that window there. So that's an example of the on timer script step running. All right, let me start to wrap up here. I'm gonna close out of the database. Oh, you know what? There was one more really important thing that I wanted to show you. I'm gonna jump over to the parent tab. Okay, good. All the data that was changed there is being committed. Right. Okay, and there's a script here, replace field contents, that does a few things. It'll take us to a different layout, the list view layout. It will perform a find, finding all records that have a number of greater than 5 in this number field, and then it'll use the replace field contents command to increment them all by 1. The replace field contents command is one of what we call the bulk commands, where bulk record manipulation, right? It just says all the records in the found set, boom, make a change to such and such a field. And those bulk commands do not fire off script triggers. I'll go ahead and run this and we'll watch the script triggers fire as we go. First of all, it's going to commit the changes that were made to this record previously. Then we're exiting out of form view, going into list view, entering list view, and it's going to load a record when it gets there. Now the script is trying to take us into find mode to perform that find of all records that have a greater than 5 in the number field. So we're leaving browse mode and we're entering find mode. Notice the greater than 5 criteria was already baked in. And in a sense, we're loading a record now in find mode. The record is actually a request, same idea. And we'll say, okay. And now we're going to leave find mode as it's going to go and perform that find. And we're going to be taken back to browse mode and load a record there. So now we've got all the records that have 5 or more are in the found set. And then immediately the numbers went from 8 and 15 to 9 and 16. That replace field contents command did its work without triggering any script triggers. All right, I'll close up the database and we're going to exit out of browse mode. We're going to exit out of this layout. We'll be closing this one window and then we'll be closing the very last window. Here we are, back into our slides. And I know I've only got a few minutes left, but there's just a few things that I want to quickly go through with you so that you know more about these script triggers, especially, again, for those of you who might be headed towards the developer certification exam. Here's how you cancel a pre-event script trigger. You simply conclude the script with an exit script statement that passes back a result of either the word false, the keyword false, or 0, okay? False or 0. Those mean the same thing. At this point, I want us to take a look at a few more details of a few of the key script triggers, although we're running out of time here, I'm going to move pretty quickly. So let's look at the object level script triggers first. First of all, what qualifies as an object? Well, a field, a button, either alone or in a button bar. But the button bar itself is not an object. You can't apply object level script triggers to a button bar, only to the individual button segments within a button bar or to a solo button. A tab control or slide control is an object, a portal, a web viewer, a chart, and a popover button and a popover panel. All of those are objects that can listen for those object level script triggers. Like onObjectEnter, which fires when this object becomes the active object. Like when we move into a field, a web viewer, or a chart, or if we tab into a button or a tab control, or if we click or tab into a portal row. All of those will cause the onObjectEnter to fire. But this onObjectEnter will not fire on a button when it's clicked. You have to use the tab key or the go to object scripts tab. Likewise, a tab control when clicked, or even when you use the go to object, will not trigger the onObjectEnter. The set web viewer script step will not trigger onObjectEnter if you're targeting a web viewer, nor will onObjectEnter trigger when you move into a portal in find mode. And this is a post-event script trigger. OnObject keystroke, we saw a lot of that. It fires when typing into this active object. And keystrokes are processed in the order of precedence, starting with the operating system. Then the FileMaker application gets its crack at handling or processing a keystroke. And then finally, the object. The onObject keystroke event will not fire on cut and paste commands because they're menu commands or application level keyboard shortcuts. Likewise, insert from index will not cause an onObject keystroke. You might be changing the value in a field with that command, but you're not pressing a key to do it. You're choosing a menu command. Nor will the arrow keys used within pop-up menus or drop-down calendars trigger this. I mentioned earlier, but it's worth repeating, onObject keystroke does not fire during a WebDirect session or when the current object is a web viewer. And onObject keystroke is a pre-event script trigger, which means it can be canceled or prevented from taking place. Here's how you would check to see which key was used to trigger a script. In the triggered script, write this line of code. You're going to use the script step if, and then in the condition of the if, use the code function. The code function returns the Unicode point value, and then nested inside the code function, use this wonderful little get function called get trigger keystroke. Get trigger keystroke is one of those magical get functions that's constantly monitoring what's happening, and it will be able to return to you the keystroke that was used to trigger the script that you're in when this if statement is being encountered. So if that equals, and then you put the desired Unicode point value. Like if you're checking to see if they press the tab key, you'd put equals 9, because we know that 9 is the Unicode point value for tab. Some of the others are here. Spacebar is 32, return is 13. Enter over on the number pad, if you have a 10 key pad, is number 10. And the alphabetic letters, of course, every character in every human written language has a Unicode point value assigned to it. So you can check for which key did they press. And if they pressed such and such key, then do the following things. All right, we've got onObject modify. It fires when this object is changed, like when you type data into a field, when you cut and paste or drag and drop into a field, when you use the insert from index command, or when you use script steps that work on layout objects to change them, like the paste script step or the insert text or insert calculated result script steps. Or when you switch tabs in the current tab control, that also triggers an onObject modify. Also, it triggers a on panel switch for that matter as well. But onObject modify will not fire on bulk edits, like when you run a spell check, or you import a bunch of records, or you use the replace field contents or relookup field contents commands, or the find and replace command. Bulk edits will not cause onObject modifier to fire, because you'd have script triggers firing off like popcorn. It would be madness. So FileMaker, Claris wisely decided to make that happen, to suspend script triggers on bulk edits. Likewise, will not fire on changes to the results of calculation fields, summary fields, or auto-enter calculation fields. Or script steps that change data even if the field's not on the layout, like the set field script step. We experienced that in my demo. The set field by name, the show custom dialog input fields, none of those will fire the onObject modify script trigger. And it's a post-event script trigger. Then we've got onObject validate, which is part of the 3-event sequence, validate, save, and exit. Then we've got onObject save. onObject save is kind of a quirky one, because while technically it's a post-event script trigger, you can still use the exit script step within the triggered script. And if you pass back a false, the event that triggered the script will be canceled, though the object is still saved. So it saves, but it's as though you didn't do the thing that triggered the onObject save. Okay. All right, a little pop quiz, and then we'll end with this. Which triggers will fire in this scenario? If we paste data into the active field, then run a go to field script step, or in other words, run a script that has a go to field script step in it that moves into a field that's in a portal on another tab. All right, one at a time. Let's walk through which script triggers. We'll see how well we know them, and then I'll conclude. So we've pasted data into the active field. Keystroke? No, not with the paste command. Modify? Anybody say modify? Yep, onObject modify is going to be the first thing that happens. Then the next thing we do is we run a script that tries to go to a different field. So we have to validate the change that was made to the current field, right? We just pasted something into it. So we've got to run through that triumvirate of validate, save, exit. So onObject validate, save, exit. Then the moving on now is it's ready to move on to the next field that's in a portal on another tab. And we saw that quirk that it first takes you into the portal before it actually changes to the next tab control, which triggers 2 trigger events, on panel switch and on object modify of the tab control. Okay? On panel switch is a relatively new one that was introduced well after on object modify had been in place for tab controls. And then lastly, we can move into the field that was in that portal, because we already moved into the portal. Now we're into the field that's on that that's in the portal on the other tab. All right, continuing on, let's look at the layout level script triggers. The layout level script triggers include things like on layout enter, which fires when switching into the current layout. It'll, whether you use the layout pop-up menu to get there, or the go to layout script step, or even when you open a new window, that will cause the on layout enter trigger event to fire. And it's a post-event script trigger. On layout keystroke, we saw a lot of that. It fires on any non-system or application keystroke made while in this layout. And it will not fire if the current object's on-object keystroke trigger returns false. Okay, so if the on-object keystroke gets first crack at it, if the user is in an object, then if that script that's triggered by on-object keystroke says false, right, it uses exit script returns false, then it will not pass forward, move forward and let the on layout keystroke have a chance. It will kind of abort there. This also does not work in WebDirect. As we talked about with on object keystroke, the on object keystroke and this on layout keystroke trigger events do not work at present in WebDirect. And this is a pre-event script trigger, which means that you can cancel it. You can abort the keystroke that triggered the script. Also, we saw in the demo that using the arrow keys or the mouse to navigate within pop-up lists or pop-up menus or drop-down calendars will not activate this trigger as well. Next, the file level script triggers. These are the easiest ones, the first ones ever, really. Things like on first window open, which fires when the first window is opened, like when you open a database. It will not fire on opening a file that's hidden, or a file, a file that's opened up in a hidden state. It will also not fire for people who access your FileMaker database via the data API, because when you access the data API, it does not open a window. Therefore, on first window open is never encountered. And this is a post-event script trigger. Right? If you're wondering, well, how in the world am I going to remember which ones are pre and which ones are post? Here's kind of a cute way that I try to remember at least the majority of them. If you think in general that FileMaker and everything in a FileMaker solution is a safe, cozy place to be, then entering something would never be something you would regret, right? But leaving such a warm, safe, cozy place like a field, a layout, a record, leaving is something that you might go, oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's something that you can prevent from happening. That's something that you can undo the event of. So again, in general, entering into things in FileMaker is not a pre-event script trigger because you wouldn't regret it, but leaving something you would. Here's a short list of some examples in that case. Pre-event. On object keystroke, on layout keystroke, right? You can prevent or back up on keystrokes being made. On object validate, on object exit, on record commit, on mode exit, on layout exit, on last window close, things that you would potentially regret. Whereas the post-event script triggers are on first window open. That's safe, that's warm and cozy. Entering a layout, entering a mode, loading a record, entering an object, modifying an object. Now that's interesting that that's post-event, but you have plenty of other opportunities like on validate to intercept there. And then on object save was kind of the quirk that while it is post-event, you can still use the exit script step to pass back a true or a false. All right, so let's do a quick recap. Events that do not trigger script triggers are your bulk actions like importing records, the replace field contents command, the relookup field contents command, running spell check, running find and replace, script steps that are not tied to a layout object, like the set field script step or the set field by name script step. These do not trigger script triggers. If the on object keystroke trigger returns false, then on layout keystroke will not happen. And lastly, the easiest one to forget is that on object enter does not fire when you click a button or a tab control, only if you tab into it. All right, so final quiz, which triggers will fire? In this case, if a user tabs into a button and then hits the spacebar to run a script that will change layouts, perform a static find, and you use replace field contents to increment the number field by 1. This is that very script that we ran through as my final example in the demonstration. And we would get first on object enter as they tabbed into a button, on object keystroke for that button as we hit the spacebar, on layout keystroke as we hit the spacebar and the layout senses it as well, on object exit as the script then takes us out of the button, and on layout exit as the script takes us out of the current layout, then on layout enter as we enter the new layout, and on record load as a record is loaded in that new layout. And then if it's going to perform a static find, we're going to have to go out of browse mode, on mode exit, into find mode, on mode enter, on record load in find mode to load that request, and then back out of find mode, on mode exit, as it performs the find and takes us back into on mode enter browse mode, and then finally loads a record. That will have performed the find. Then the replace field contents command doesn't trigger any script triggers because it's one of those bulk operations. All right, some practical examples of when you might use script triggers. You could use the on layout enter script trigger to sort records when a user comes to a sub-summary report layout. You could use script triggers to navigate to a wide or a tall layout on an iPad or an iPhone when the user rotates the device, right? You could sense with the layout size change script trigger that the size of the layout has changed in response to the rotation of the device from tall to wide or vice versa. And you could actually then run a script that takes them to a layout that takes better advantage of that size and shape of a screen. You can also use script triggers to improve performance of your database by trying to avoid as much as possible using unstored calculations and instead trigger scripts to update your totals fields when the precedent values that contribute to those totals change. Now that involves a pretty serious strategy on your part to try to avoid unstored calculations, but you can really speed up a database by doing so. Unstored calculations are one of the slowest aspects or components of FileMaker, and so we want to try to be very careful about using them too much. All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment below, hit like, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and if you need training and would like to attend training either live at our sunny Long Beach, California training center or anywhere on the planet from where you are over Zoom, we'd love to have you in our classes. Visit acceleratecomputertraining.com to check out what classes we have to offer and schedules and dates and prices and so forth.